Hi, welcome on everyone. We'll wait for our room to populate a little bit here, and we're going to talk about the surprise teams and whether or not they are for real. But first, Danny, the ceremonial face making. Let's begin with what is something I usually don't prepare this. I usually have one just like right at the top. You can start if you got one.
Reaction to Tyrese Maxey having a hamstring issue.
Your opinion on my hat.
Is it from a place I would know?
No, I just bought it at a store in Barcelona.
I kind of love it for that reason.
Yeah, it has nothing to. It's like Club Sandwich. I'm part of Club Sandwich, baby. No, like we went into this hat store, my sister and I and my brother-in-law and Ashlyn, and we all bought food themed hats at this place. So this is the one that I selected, and of course it's now incumbent upon me a year and a half later to wear it. Okay, one more here. I'll leave the honors to you, actually.
Cleveland being the last undefeated team in the NBA.
Really makes you think. All right, then. Let's do a podcast here. Welcome on to Dunc'd On. Dunc'd On Prime, Dunc'd on YouTube. And what we're going to talk about today is which teams that have surprised so far, or just playing exceedingly well, whether you consider it a surprise or not, do we expect to sustain that level of play throughout the season, if, of course, they maintain a level of health? So, yeah, I'll give you the honors, Danny. What team should we start with here? We'll do a mix of subjective and objective factors that we like to look at and evaluating whether play is sustainable or not.
I think it's only fair to start with the last remaining undefeated team in the NBA, and that's the Cleveland Cavaliers. They are now 9-0. For those who want it, their clean the glass net rating is plus 13.6, which hilariously is not number one, even though they're undefeated. There are two teams ahead of them. We may talk about those teams at some point. Second in offense, fifth in defense.
Yeah, so I mean, they blew out Toronto on opening night, and you didn't know whether that said more about Cleveland or Toronto. Probably actually Cleveland, ironically enough. And so, first thing we could take a look at here is their strength of schedule. Now, they haven't had to play themselves, which makes things a little bit easier. And they have had a relatively easy strength of schedule. Dunks and threes has a really good metric that takes into account not only the names of the teams that they play, but who's actually been available for those teams. And Cleveland has had a somewhat easy strength of schedule, but that was more of a criticism in the first week. And then they played against a full strength New York team. They played against a full strength Milwaukee team and then a not full strength Milwaukee team. Both those are actually kind of close wins, but they have beaten all comers so far. So certainly in terms of just that aspect, I wouldn't say that there's anything that really sticks out to me. They've been about equal in terms of their below average strength of schedule on both offenses and defenses faced.
Yeah, I think that so their cleaning the glass differential is that of a 69 win team. They're not a 69 win team. Like that's not the way it is. But on the fundamentals, I think that there's a lot that I do believe in for the Cavs. They're fifth in defense, and I think that this team has very good defensive personnel. So the idea that they can kind of hold this up, and when you look at it, that number 5 in defense is actually being weighed down by opponent shooting luck. The Cavs are giving up the 5th strongest opponent 3-point percentage so far this year. And generally speaking, you expect that to regress to the mean either direction, though there may be some exceptions to that general conceit. But I think that's the way to do it. And so, like, I mean, Cleveland being 5th in defense, I believe in that wholeheartedly. I think they could be better than that, potentially even. But they have the but they have the second ranked offense. And I think that's rosy, even if they've been the worst in the league at generating free throws, and then they've been below average on the offensive glass. Neither of those is a massive surprise. So I don't think they're going to drill threes at this rate, especially considering they've done it without Strus. But if we're talking about legit or not, I think they're 100% legit. But their level, I would say they're more like the 10th best offense. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, before the season, I had them projected in the low teens when I kind of went through, but I didn't see them as a top 10 group. I think Kenny Atkinson and getting more of a flowing style and running more through Evan Mobley, who's been very solid so far. That has helped. Playing Sam Merrill more
Yep.
has really helped a lot too. He gives them a fulcrum strategically on some of those backup units, and even someone like Ty Jerome. And probably the biggest thing has been that Darius Garland has broken out as well. Jared Allen remains very efficient, and so I think, could I say that this is going to be a top 10 group going forward? I mean, they have, pretty darn good talent. Like, they've been at about that level when healthy at times. So yeah, yeah, number 5 seems maybe a little rosy to me, and there will be injuries to Mitchell in particular. Is probably going to miss time over the course of the season. The rest of their guys have been relatively durable over the course of their careers, unless it's something like a face fracture or something for Garland. So yeah, I mean, and I think this is a pretty deep team. They've managed already with we thought the injury to Strus would be a big one, and they're 9-0 without him. That's their starting small forward. So I think unless it's an injury to Mitchell, and even him, you could win games against mediocre to bad teams, of which there are actually many right now in the NBA, surprisingly. So I think that's another reason I kind of expect them to keep this going and be at the top of the East all year, is that I think they have enough depth, enough system. You can stagger those 4 main guys very well, so your bench units are always going to have a pretty decent floor to them. And I think, like we've talked about so often, just their night to night floor in terms of competing, athleticism, talent, guys on the bench who can step in, all of that augurs a lot of regular season success, including the track record even before this of when all those 4 guys were healthy 2 years ago.
And beyond that, I mean, so yeah, they were 7th in offense in 22-23, and that was closer to reasonable health than last year was. And with Kenny Atkinson at the helm, I also have more confidence that they'll be creative on offense if things grind down, and that they'll be a little bit more fluid with the rotations. So I think that both those bode well for them as a regular season team. We discussed this a little bit. I think it was over the weekend, and I'm still not completely sold on the Cavs. Oh yeah, this was in the context of Evan Mobley as a playoff team. Like, the idea of, like, will they, when they face a comparable squad, will they be less or greater than the sum of their parts? But A, we'll get a lot more information on that between now and then. And B, like, that's not really the conversation we're having right now. I think there will be a time for it, but we can wait.
Yeah, I think that's right. This is more about the regular season, but also if you wanted me to pick who I think will be the second best playoff team in the East right now, given some of the injury issues in Milwaukee and ineffectiveness, obviously, and then also in uh, in Philly and the New York's defensive problems, like, I might actually say that the Cavs would be my pick to be the second best playoff team. I don't know, and they do have a lot of talent on this team, even if it's the problem has been that it hasn't fit together that well in the past. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing statistically to me that really pops out for this group of other than maybe their own 3-point shooting as something that wouldn't sustain. And these are younger guys, like guys who look like they're playing at a higher level, and they can withstand injuries. So I mean, I think I picked these guys to be the 2 seed in the East before the season, albeit right in the mix with Philly, New York, and Milwaukee. But I felt like they had the best chance of being a good regular season team behind Boston. So I think they're going to be the 2 seed. That would be my prediction right now.
I also think there's a
and
chance.
probably
I don't
mid
think
50s.
I don't think Cleveland will be healthy enough. I do think there's a chance that they get the one because Boston's going to be so cautious with their guys. But I think Boston's just a more talented group, and because they're deeper, even if Porzingis is already out right now, they can withstand. Jaylen Brown's missing time at the moment as well. They can withstand that better than the average team. So I don't think Cleveland's going to get the one, but I'm not taking it off the table.
So we can get to Golden State here. Already got a couple of comments about them, and we've talked about them pretty extensively, including last night. But maybe we can focus in more on their statistical profile. What sticks out in terms of that for whether this is sustainable for Golden State?
Well, so when you look at what's different than last year, something that stands out to me is that the Warriors had the number 22 turnover rate last year, and that's number 9 so far this year. I do think that having guys like Kyle Anderson in the rotation could potentially help that. But when you consider they had Chris Paul last year, you wouldn't necessarily expect that to continue. And if the Warriors have been bottom 11 in turnover percentage each of the last 5 seasons. So if you end a few more possessions with giveaways rather than shots, that's going to weaken your offense a little bit. And then as is always a good thing to look at early in the season, opponent 3-point shooting percentage. The Warriors are the luckiest team in the NBA, and it's not super close. The median right now in terms of opponent 3-point shooting is about 36.5%. And the Warriors are at 29.6% on opponent threes. So if you regress that to the mean, then this defense, which has been legitimately very good, becomes a little less great.
Yeah, I mean, some of these numbers are pretty insane. Opponents are shooting 28.2% on uncontested threes. And now it is worth noting that the opponent shooters that have been going against them have actually been really bad. Now, some of that is based on the games that they played against the Warriors, particularly because they played 2 against New Orleans already. But opponents, looking at the opponents' weighted uncontested 3 field goal percentage, so basically like what did these guys, when they're not playing Golden State, shoot? It's only 35.5%. So maybe some of that is allowing shots to the right guys. Some of it is maybe just playing teams that are super cold themselves at the start of the year. And of course, the games against the Warriors themselves still make up a fair amount of that. So certainly Warriors opponents are going to shoot better. On self-created 3-pointers, Warriors opponents are shooting 23%.
Wow.
And off passes, Warriors opponents are shooting 29% from 3. But I do think some of the things that can sustain for them, opponents shooting 50% from 2. I think the Warriors are gonna force a lot of turnovers this year. Like, they're gonna play hard. They got a lot more sharks than they used to. They got length. They have intelligence. Guys aren't playing that many minutes, so they can kind of ramp that up. Like, just subjectively watching them, there are some components that look like that 22 team. They are also flying around more, double teaming more on the pick and roll, just in general. It's a way to force more turnovers as well. Opponents are, when they shoot at the rim and Golden State contest, opponents are shooting 50.6%. That's one of the better numbers in the league, despite not having an amazing traditional rim protector at this point in time. So I think this defense is, because what are they right now? They're 5-6 points ahead of the number 3 team in defense at the moment.
They're on cleaning the glass. They're 2 points ahead right now.
Okay, yeah, I guess they played, but honestly, it wasn't a fully healthy Boston team, but
right.
They did hold them down pretty well. I would actually, I think this is going to be a group that's going to be very good on defense, top 5, even potentially.
Well, and something I like to look at early in the season, and we'll explain how these things can diverge from one another, is that the Warriors are 7th best in opponent location effective field goal percentage so far this year. They're not giving up a ton of shots around the rim.
And they typically were not amazing in that metric. It was just that they, at their best, they would force a ton of misses around the rim.
Right.
So that's, yeah, the fact that they are kind of forcing more mid-rangers this year is a big positive for them.
And yeah, so I think that even if regress the shooting to the mean, like this is a very good defense, and if the offense is going to be strong, I think when Steph Curry's on the floor, I've been surprised and somewhat impressed at that they've been, at least as I'm thinking about it, more viable offensively when Curry's been off the floor. That's been such a huge
Yeah,
problem for
they're
them.
getting up a lot of threes at least, and the other thing too is that I think bad defenses, they're going to just beat them with their movement and their 3-point shooting and their passing and forcing turnovers and getting out in transition. Good defenses, I think they might still struggle, but there aren't that many of those.
So I looked at it, and the Warriors are currently 112.5 clean the glass offensive rating when Curry's off the floor. That is 41st percentile this year, but I believe that's better than they've done most years that when he's been out.
Yeah, and I mean also with Curry, they've been very good. So I mean that's another thing that's
but
and you saw it against Boston last night that like he did really still have that level of gravity and caused a lot of problems for Boston.
But so Nate, I want to kind of train this conversation back to what I think is a really fascinating question. We got into this a little bit with the Suns and the Warriors last night because we did both of their games. So we both acknowledge that the Warriors are not as good both as the record and their net rating at this juncture. How good are they actually, though? Is it how big do you think the margin is between they've been playing over their heads, but how far over their heads?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think another reason to believe this can sustain is the depth. I mean, they've had, Steph has missed 3 games. Andrew Wiggins, who's playing much better, he's missed some time. DeAnthony Melton, we've barely even seen him this year. He's another guy who's supposed to be a stalwart for them. But I mean, they really, other than just like, premium creators, of which they only have one, they go pretty deep at every position, and then they can also match up. I think Steve Kerr and his group are doing a really nice coaching job this year. So I think, I mean, I had them as like a 45 win team. I think that defense is really going to give them a floor this year. And even if the offense regresses, like if they finish 6th in offense, I would be extremely surprised. And also if you look at their, let me get it in front of me here, their strength of schedule has been pretty miserable, not crazy. But they still face the 27th hardest schedule. But playing Boston last night helped that a lot.
But by the way, the team that has played the easiest dunks and threes schedule so far is not a team we're going to talk about because they're 3-6. That's the Pelicans.
So yeah, let's I would I think this is a 50 win group. I think they're going to be in contention to be a top 4 seed, and I think their defense is going to give them the floor. Also, there's a possibility of a trade too. Like if they're really in the mix, like you could see them try to add another significant player. Now, how much would that potentially denude their depth? Who is the best offensive player that even would be available at the trade deadline, right? Because that's
who knows?
Their need is pretty obvious.
Maybe they could trade Jonathan Kuminga and Andrew Wiggins for Paul George.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe Paul George would be available. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, I still like it is something where you do think of like, all right, what if they did make a move for Markkanen with some of the depth that they have as well, but that Markkanen now cannot be traded this year. But that's a little too far in the future. But the idea that these guys have a high floor night to night, again, like the depth that they have, and we'll see going up against good teams without Steph. I'm still kind of wondering how good they can be. But, I think like there's a lot of teams that they're just going to be able to beat, particularly because it's not only about whether they're good or bad teams. Like so many teams are just injured and just don't have the depth, right? Like, I mean, they smoked the Pelicans when Steph was out because they still had like way more talent than the Pelicans did because they were also injured. And so I love, particularly this year when it seems like every team is already injured. Like we went through, how many high quality matchups were there last night? Like by that old stat that Dan put together, where you say, all right, what teams have their top 2 healthy players together. You know, there are maybe like 5 of the 12 games or something last night were high quality matchups. So like the season already seems to really be wearing on a lot of teams. Let's see here.
I have one. I have one I want to do next.
Yeah, let's do it.
There are 4 teams in the NBA right now that are top 10, including the glass, on both offensive rating and defensive rating. The Boston Celtics, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Golden State Warriors, and the Houston Rockets. The Rockets are 5-3, plus 7.7 net rating, 7th on offense, 4th on defense.
How are they 7th on offense?
They're grabbing a ton of offensive rebounds. They're not turning the ball over, and they're somehow 5th to last in effective field goal percentage.
But that actually makes you think it's more sustainable, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. So again, you know, this is great context for this discussion. I always, around this time of year, like to look back at this. This is a great thing that Christian and Narsu put together. So I'm going to just run through a few of the metrics that generally will have stabilized. You know, we're looking 7-8 games by this time of year. So, and the general rule of thumb is, how is something that usually settles faster than how good? So, for example, where you are taking your shots versus the percentage you are hitting from there, particularly jump shots. I think at the rim is maybe less luck based. So here are some of the stats that are already pretty meaningful, you know, that are at least 50% correlation with the team's end of season numbers. Pace, 3-point attempt rate, getting to the foul line, percentage of assisted baskets, number of threes taken by the opponents, win percentage, and net rating. At least 50% correlated through about 8 games. Now, with more injuries, it seems like, than ever, and also where you've had a few of these teams that have played sets against team already, maybe that's not, this is from a couple of years ago, so maybe that's in this particular year, that's not necessarily as much the case. And then you get into a few other things that we're pretty close on. Turnover percentage for yourself. Interesting that opponent turnover percentage is more volatile.
Well, that makes sense because there's more variance in terms of who you play. Like, you know, you might not get an even distribution. I think that makes sense.
And I do think there are some.
That's true of almost all the stats, including 3-point attempt rate. It's a few games later. I think a lot of those are for that reason.
Yeah, and opponent turnover percentage, I'd be interested to see what it is for steals, because I've always felt like you have more control over steals and maybe charges taken, but there are a lot of opponent turnovers like a travel or stepping out of bounds on the sideline as you're faking a corner 3 and driving to the basket, that I don't know how much control the defense actually has over those sorts of things. You know, so offensive rebound percentage is still up there. 2-point percentage, actually, you know more about that. That's usually after the 11th game is when you have an R squared of 0.5 to the team's end of season numbers. True shooting percentage, and then 3-point percentage stuff is the stuff that really tends to lag behind, and it takes, you know, almost half a season to really have a lot. And particularly opponent 3-point percentage is the biggest one, where it takes 33 games before you start to see a 0.5% correlation with your end of season numbers. Or sorry, not 0.5%, but R squared is 0.5.
And so I do want to talk about the Rockets offense, but since you brought it up, what of the stats that the R squared has already kind of gotten to that 0.5 threshold? Opponent 3-point attempt rate. The Rockets have the lowest opponent 3-point attempt rate in the entire NBA, just 33%.
And that completely squares with the way that they play defense, because they switch, they force you to go one-on-one, and they're not going to, and they have good enough defensive personnel, other than maybe Şengün, that they don't feel like they just have like matchups that they can't deal with, where they're getting 2 on the ball and then they're getting in rotation.
And on top of that, and this ties in with the switching you were talking about, the Rockets give up the fewest threes. They also give up by a margin the fewest corner threes in the entire NBA. And the idea is, like, if you're switching and all that, you're not conceding those shots at the same rate that a team in a drop coverage or bringing help like the Pelicans used to from the opposite side is. And so like their proportion is 7% corner, 26% above the break.
Yeah. And, they're not particularly benefiting from some shooting luck from opponents necessarily either.
Which they did last year, for those who remember. Last year, they had the luckiest defense. They had the luckiest defense in the league.
They are also number 2 in the NBA in terms of opponent rim percentage when they contest, only 48.3%, which again, not having that one traditional dominating rim protector, that's a very interesting number. That's one that I don't know exactly how predictive that number is. But I mean, number 1 is OKC. Interestingly, Phoenix is another one that has a pretty low number on that. We can talk about that momentarily. So yeah, an opponent 2-point shooting overall 47.8%. I mean, certainly I find that's more sustainable than 3-point shooting to the extent that it is. So yeah, I mean, I believe in their defense pretty well. The offense, that is something interesting. Now, this is also a team that kind of, seems like they overperform, at least in the Udoka era, have underperformed their point differential, shall we say. But I think they have a little bit more at the end of games. They've got a few more clutch wins than they've had so far. But yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, they're only 5-3, so I didn't go there yet as they're outperforming so much. But I'm glad you did because of that net rating. I mean, that's something that might be predictive. And then also, I think the other thing you can point to for them is just that nobody else in the West other than OKC, Phoenix, and Golden State is looking like they're any good right now.
I mean, Dallas has had some strong games, but
you're yeah. All right, yeah. I'll give you Dallas. That's a fair one.
Yeah, and so
for Houston, Dallas, interesting. Yeah,
go ahead.
We can talk about them at some point.
Well, and so I'm a little bit with Houston's kind of shot stuff because I found this really interesting about how well they're the number 7 offense despite being 26th in effective field goal percentage. And part of that is they're only making 33% of their own 3-pointers, and they're 24th in field goal percentage at the rim. Part of the reason they might be so low in field goal percentage at the rim is that they're getting a lot of their own misses. So you can kind of get those the JV rebounds, referring to Jonas Valanciunas. So that's worth keeping an eye on. And they're also below 27% on corner threes so far this year. But when you think about who the Rockets play within the rotation, they don't really have those corner 3 gunners right now. So I think that, and something else to kind of flag on that is that Dunc'd On threes does a kind of a luck adjusted, you could call it, offensive rating for that team, which I think can be interesting. And so for the Rockets, they're 16th in Dunc'd On threes offensive rating, which adjusts on some factors, whereas they're 7th in cleaning the glasses, which does not adjust and takes out garbage time.
Yeah. Also note, they played the Spurs 3 times already? I thought they only played 2. Maybe
No, they played 3 times because they played on Wednesday. Again, complete nonsense. I've lobbied this complaint many times before, but I understand the not wanting to travel, but the competitive balance stuff with this is bananas.
Yeah, and the Spurs offense is absolutely atrocious. And they're not going to shoot a lot of threes. They're not going to have a lot of spacing. So yeah, I mean that's what is it? 3/8 of their sample size right now is the Spurs.
More than 1/3 of their season.
So, I mean, this feels like a 45 type of win team to me right now. I'm not going to adjust my prior on them quite that much yet. But again, this is another team that falls into that category of the sort of teams we've been talking about. A lot of depth, youth, and just a certain floor of competitiveness and athleticism night to night. All right, we got to talk about the Suns here next, I would say. And for Phoenix, it just they're winning games. They have some pretty good talent. I started to see a little bit more of a system emerging last night in the game against Miami. But I mean, if they had a single win where you're oh, they're really taking care of these guys, this doesn't feel like a team that just is going to be blowing people out, which is where if you're really going to be at the top of the conference, you need to be getting a fair amount of blowout wins. And they also haven't had really any health issues whatsoever. Beal has missed a couple with the elbow of their main guys.
Yeah, so I'll run through the Phoenix's margin of victory in their 7 wins so far, which 7 wins is fantastic. They beat the Clippers in overtime in the Intuit Dome opener. Then they lost the Lakers by 7 in LA. Then they beat the Mavs by 12, Lakers by 4, Clippers by 6, Blazers by 5, Sixers without Embiid, and I think that was that Paul George's debut game? Yeah, it was, by 2, and then the Heat by 3 in a game we talked about last night on Dunc'd On Prime.
Yeah, I just think they're not a team that's like can just like put teams away necessarily. Like their late game offense has been pretty good. We'll see though. Like it could be the sort of thing where they how's their strength of schedule? Like pretty average.
It's actually better than average so far. I think they're 10th in the dunks and threes measure, so that's pretty good. And they played the Lakers a couple times. And most of the teams they faced, they had their complement of guys. Like they played the Mavs. I was remembering that somebody missed it, but when I looked quickly at the box score, I didn't notice any prominent absences. Maybe I just glanced too fast, but I think they've been pretty good there. I will note that the Suns, by a cleaning the glasses measure, which is like a win differential, which is basically like versus win expectancy with your net rating, the Suns are outperforming their differential by the most in the league right now. 7-1 with the differential of a 48 win team.
So, I mean, just watching them, they haven't really dominated, right? I think they still make some mistakes. They're not a team where they just they're not one of these teams. Like I think they have a little better depth, but they also don't necessarily have that kind of athletic floor that we're talking about necessarily. They were relatively healthy last year. Like I'm not one of these people who thinks that like Kevin Durant is like a huge injury risk any more than anyone else is at this point, and same with Booker. And I also think because they have Tyus Jones now and even Monte Morris, who isn't even playing for them, that if Beal or Booker miss time, that they could actually be okay. If KD misses time, I think they might be screwed because he's doing a lot for them on the defensive end. They don't really have any other 3s or 4s that you're a huge believer in right now. Certainly not anyone who can shoot or do anything with the ball. So he's the guy who's probably really irreplaceable. I think they can survive a Booker or Beal loss more with the personnel they have this year. Yusuf Nurkic going down could also be a big problem for them.
Sure. I mean, Nurkic, the rim protection numbers have been great. I was thinking I might do that for the 15 and 60, depending on where things go. Also, the Suns. So there are 4 teams that have played 6 or more clutch games already. So that's a margin within 5 points within the last 5 minutes. And all the other teams are close to 500. The Suns are 6-0. And so you expect a regression to the mean there. Like even if you have a plus 50 clutch net rating, they're plus 51.4, you're still not going to win every single clutch game. And so that's and the bigger point that this is what I was trying to make is like 6 of your 8 being close is not exactly what you're looking for. And for the record, the other teams that have played that many clutch games, Indiana's number 1 at 7 already. 7 for them, and then 6 each for the Suns, the Nuggets, and the Rockets.
Yeah, and they are getting up more 3s. They're actually 5th in 3-point attempt rate. Like that's really helped with Bud. They never ever get to the rim. They're 30th there. And then, they're still a solid mid-range shooting team. They definitely take a fair number of mid-rangers still, but they make them in a way that a lot of teams don't. And that can be hard to defend. So I had them, I think, for 51 wins this year. I'd probably still be right in that area. They've looked decent. But I just, other than the fact that they've banked these wins, I don't think my opinion on them from where I was at preseason has significantly changed. Again, maybe you feel better about them just because everyone else is disappointing so far. But yeah, I want to see them play some real teams on the road. Who's the best team they've played so far?
Dallas, but they played them at home.
And they smoked Dallas. They were on the second night of a back-to-back too. So that's a good win at home. But yeah, it's also not
And also the Suns
Dallas hasn't been
the
one of
Suns
best
have only
teams
played
so
3 road games so far this year, and all of them have been in Los Angeles. So you could
far.
they play Dallas on the road on Friday. That'll be a good clarifier game we might discuss. They play Oklahoma City a week from Friday, which I think is an NBA Cup game, which could be really fun.
All right, who else did you want to talk about here?
I don't want to spend a ton of time on them, especially because they're only 5-3, and so sometimes are they really that different? But Sacramento, I mean, they are 5-3, and what I wanted to point to we've brought up this dunks and threes strength of schedule thing before. The Kings have the 3rd easiest opponent strength of schedule, which factors in.
I'm seeing it as the easiest, and it's negative 2.9 strength of schedule, which is 0.8 lower than Memphis, which is negative 2.1, and then Boston is negative 1.5. So the Kings are like a massive outlier on both sides of the ball on the page I'm looking at.
Anyway, they're very fortunate.
I sent you the link to what I'm looking at. We can reconcile this. We got to figure out which of us is wrong.
Yeah.
On saying these numbers. But
we are on different pages. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I think like they've blown. I mean, I think what you can feel good about is just that they've blown out the teams they should have blown out. And that was a big problem for them a year ago, is that they lost to, other than the New Orleans Pelicans, who they will never ever beat. They might actually beat them this year if they play, because the Pelicans are not the same team anymore. But I think at least the fact that they are just absolutely housing the bad teams that they play, like Portland, Utah, that those games haven't been competitive. That's like a decent indicator, particularly because they struggled in that area last year.
By the way, it's the Kings don't play the Pelicans until early February, but then they of course play them 3 times in 1 week, because that's the way this NBA is scheduled. And so who knows if there's a Zion tweak or a De'Aaron Fox tweak, that whole sample is going to be thrown out. But yeah, Sacramento, I mean, so they played a soft set, and I like that the Dunks of Threes version also includes player availability, because there are some of those, like when you played Utah, I think is a good example of like, did they have Markkanen? Did they not have Markkanen? Those sorts of things. And so like with Sacramento, the other factor that I've been talking about a fair amount is like opponent 3-point shooting, because generally that regresses, and like Sacramento's actually doing fine this year. They were burned by that a year ago, where I think the opponents just like drilled threes on them nonstop. Sacramento's been okay on that in the 24-25 regular season so far. But when you look at kind of like, well, what are they overall? Like, they've been good on the defensive glass. That's not a huge surprise. That's something that they've done previously. They were first last year. They're 7th so far this year, but they're forcing more turnovers than I expected. They're not fouling as much, and maybe those things are Mike Brown taking over a little bit. The foul rate, defensive foul rate, is actually in line with what it was 2 years ago, and maybe that's the truth rather than last year. But I don't think they're 12th. Even with as much as I appreciate Keon Ellis, like, they're not the 12th best defense in the league.
No, it seems unlikely. And yeah, that's because I think some of the teams that, Utah, Portland, that just have no chance. Some of the shooting numbers for them are fascinating. They are DFL in offensive location effective field goal percentage. Not a huge surprise with DeRozan, but also Fox has kind of become a big mid-range guy as well. They are shooting very poorly from 33.5%. And they're above the break 3-point shooting has been miserable. But they are not taking nearly as many threes as they did in the past. Obviously, that's the DeRozan effect. And then their mid-range shooting has just been a monster on other twos, we'll call them. So twos away from the rim. They are 49.8%. That's number 1 in the league. And then they're also just bludgeoning teams by shooting 74% at the rim. And they're also 52% on floaters. So I think, some of that mid-range stuff could regress some. And if it does, then maybe their offense is going to not be as good as it's been. And they probably also have a little bit of a ceiling there to your offense if you're not shooting the 3 that much. And their volume at the rim is not crazy at the moment. Let me double check that. But
Nate, by the way, the bottom 3 teams in offensive effective location effective field goal percentage this year are all top 10 in actual effective field goal percentage so far. The Knicks,
Yeah.
the Suns, and the Kings. And so the Knicks and the Suns are both making a ton of threes. That is one way that you can kind of defy that. And then Sacramento's one of the most efficient teams and add the like inside the paint. They're 52% on short mid range, which is pretty much floater range, and then they're number 4 in terms of field goal percentage at the rim.
Yeah, and they are not taking many at the rim. They are actually 29th in the percentage of their shots at the rim. Again, I think that maybe Golden One Center has taken over some of these weird.
Oh, I think they have.
things.
I remember that from one of their games earlier in the year that I was like, but we'll see.
Another one I want to just put a little bit of a pin in is OKC. Obviously, they lost their first one last night, and I think they're going to be really good all season. Both they and their opponents just cannot make a three right now, which was actually they've actually improved now. They've had some hot shooting games, so they're pretty much right around.
They're 18th right now, including
they're 18th. Yeah, they were very low a little earlier.
Yeah, they were 29th about a week and a half ago.
Yeah,
maybe.
But their opponents can't make a three. I mean, they're kind of similar to the Warriors, except only more so because opponents just can't do anything around the rim against them. Chad has been ridiculous as well. So, and they just have so many guys who make plays and turn you over. I mean, I think like this defense has the potential to be like one of the best that we've seen if they can stay healthy. I do also wonder what happens in games that either Jalen Williams or Shea miss and how they generate offense. And I think that they don't. Josh Giddey would push the pace a little bit more. How are they doing in transition? Are they at the same level they were last year in transition? Because that was something that really, really juiced them a lot a year ago.
Their transition frequency, which is a percentage of your possessions was chart with the transition play, that's higher actually this year than last year. They're 15.8 to 20.5, but there's a small sample size element there. Their per possession, like offensive rating in those circumstances is down from 1.29 points per possession to 1.16, which, so you go from being top 10 to being bottom 10, but that's still not as dramatic. And
I could point to this too, which I think is interesting. So they're 9th in running off of opponent misses, and they actually don't run that often off of steals, except that they get so many steals,
right?
And you just, even if you don't run that often relative to everyone else off of steals, by getting a steal, you're still going to run way more often than your average possession. So they're actually number 1 in transition frequency, but it's pretty much all because they are getting so many steals, not because they are doing so much with the transition opportunities that they're getting. So that'll be something to keep an eye on for them. And because I was a little bit concerned about what their offense was going to look like. And of course, reintegrating Hartenstein in after the preseason and his hand injury will be another thing that they kind of have to deal with. They could do a little more on the offensive glass. Like he may actually help them, but but their defense is amazing.
What do you think of the Thunder being second to last in free throw attempt rate so far this year?
Yeah, Shea has taken more threes. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is that he just isn't getting to the line the way that he did before. Perhaps that's some of the changes in enforcement. He had a pretty big drop off, I recall, in the second half of last year as well. So
the Thunder don't have that many other guys who, I mean, Jalen Williams, J-Dub can, but they don't really have that many foul merchants on this roster, and that's not even really the way they play. I'll be interested to see whether, even though he doesn't play that way, like if having Hartenstein on the interior, if you just get more fouls that way, like that sort of thing. But I think that there might have been some indications here with that drop off from Gilgeous-Alexander last year that maybe, and they're more dependent on him than most teams are on a single player, and it hasn't carried over for him the way. I mean, Trae Young had this preposterous free throw attempt rate in the early part of the season. I believe that's toned down a little bit, but Shea isn't necessarily that kind of foul merchant now.
So yeah, we can move to news here in a moment, unless you had any other teams you wanted to talk about or take a couple of questions too.
No, I think that's about right. they're in terms of one of the weird things about this season is that there aren't that many teams that are just putting up like a huge win-loss record. There are only 5 teams in the NBA that have a better record than 5-3. So that's and of those teams, we are pretty confident in a fair number of them being legit. So it's not there aren't that many crazy outliers so far. 10 more games in, there probably will be some.
Yeah, we're only 10% of the way through the schedule so far. Yeah, I got a couple of questions here. We did talk about the Warriors before, but not in this specific aspect of could they actually contend? What are your thoughts there?
I think they could win a round, maybe 2 rounds. I don't expect them to win a championship unless they move something from here. Like this team, to me, the defense is very good, and maybe you could argue the defense could be better than 2022. But I don't think...
so give me like your power rankings of teams' defense right now.
OKC 1.
Yeah,
I know
they might be 2. There might be 2.
They might be. I mean, remember that Boston's missing one of their best rim protectors, and I mean they will be for a while.
Well, okay. Oh, you're talking about like for the playoffs. Yeah, maybe Boston's. I don't think during the regular season. I think Golden State's even better than. I mean, and then you've got, here's your top 10 in defense right now is 3 Dallas, 4 Houston, Cleveland. Cleveland might be a contender, but they, especially with their bench groups, they play some liabilities. Maybe Cleveland's like absolute fastball with the 2 bigs might be better, but they also have 2 small, like they have some scabs to pick at. Clippers, I think, will be good all year, but I don't know if they have like quite the top end. Phoenix, Boston, Orlando, maybe could get there. But I think they're going to kind of struggle for a while. And then, Minnesota is the other one you would point to. They have not been very good so far.
And by the way, Orlando giving up a crazy high 40% opponents on threes. That you expect to progress. They'll look better then.
Yeah, so I think Orlando, Minnesota can get, but no, I actually think as I really look at it right now, I would say this Golden State team is a decent bet to me. I don't know about regular season. Maybe they're a better bet to be number 2 in the regular season than anyone else. I mean, obviously it's very early, so nobody's a great bet to finish at that number. But if I had to pick one, they might be my number 2 regular season defense. Like that actually, because they have only 2 bad defensive players that they play, and those guys have done a pretty good job of executing. Hey, maybe, but this will be, I think, the first time in Buddy Hield's career. It might even be the first time in Buddy Hield's career that he's been on a defense that's in the top 20. And certainly top half of the league. That's got to be right. I can't. I mean, those Sacramento teams, they had like a stretch of like 20 straight seasons where they were in the bottom 10 in defense or something like that. So, and the Indiana teams that he's on weren't any good. I mean, maybe
he wasn't on Philly. He wasn't on Philly very long last year. I mean,
yeah, I mean, you could technically count that, I guess, but I probably if you look at what their numbers were, well, he was actually there. I don't know if they would have actually been top half of the league.
Oh, I could do this one briefly for Matthew. He said, assume the Nuggets want to aggregate Saric and Najee to acquire a rotation player. They can't aggregate. That is something they are not.
No. Are they? No, they're not in the second April.
Oh, they're not in this. But it would.
Yeah. Who do you think owns this team?
Oh, that's right. That's right. How much would they have to pay a team to get off those contracts? A fair amount. I mean, and again, I mean, Calvin Pelinka giving a player option to a couple guys. I mean, Westbrook's is looking better, but like Saric getting a player option. Man. For that second year.
That's kind of... But yeah, I think like they do have a 2031 pick available, so they might be able to make a move. And I want to get another, like Denver's feeling like maybe they're kind of righting the ship slightly now. Like, and just again, like Nikola Jokic, if healthy, is like almost a 50-win team on his own, and he's healthy. No matter who's around them. And they've also like just getting Saric out of the rotation and frankly, like Jamal Murray wasn't playing very well. Porter Jr. is playing better. Like they may start to come around to at least, be looking like a decent team.
and-
Although obviously our discussion of them is the biggest story, and maybe that they're not, a true championship contender. I think that's certainly a very reasonable concern.
Briefly from Black Swan, man, can the Warriors still make a move to get better? Of course they can. The Warriors only owe one first-round pick moving forward, and it's only if it's in the 21 to 30. So not only could they trade inside that protection, but they could move anything else. They don't have any extras, but they have functionally almost all of their own. So they have those.
They can trade 4 first-round picks essentially.
Yeah,
well, no, is that right? No, they could trade 3. They could trade 3.
But then they also have young players that are of interest. So if they wanted to, yes, they could. Do they want to?
Yeah.
Unclear.
And they even have Looney and Peyton as expiring salaries too. Yeah, they have a lot of optionality, but things seem to be going pretty well for them right now. But yeah, I don't know if it's a championship group to finish answering that question. I guess I never did, just because I don't think the offense is going to be good enough. There's if I think the league is just much tougher. That Boston team is a colossus. I think OKC is way better than any team they would have faced in the West playoffs 2 years ago, and Steph isn't as good. Even though I think you can make the argument, I would say that their team is about as talented as that team from, I guess it'll have been 3 years ago by the time we get to the playoffs. Other than Steph and Draymond,
I am excited to see Steve Kerr throw out a 12-man rotation in the Warriors' first playoff game.
Let's hit some news here now, and
I think we have to start in Philly.
Yeah, we do.
Tyrese Maxey, at least 2 weeks with a right hamstring injury. That means we're getting close to Thanksgiving before the Sixers potentially, we don't know if they'll happen then, have their 3 best players available. Hamstrings are notoriously tricky. You worry about a recurrence or coming back a little bit too soon. There will, of course, be pressure to do so when you consider that at this moment, the Sixers are really struggling. They're what? They're 1-6 right now, and they're missing Joel Embiid for at least the next 2 games.
Well, and this now makes Joel's suspension, because it's reported that he's going to return against the Knicks on Tuesday for the NBA Cup, by the way. Because I actually care about the NBA Cup. It gives me something to lock in on. That's a consequence if guys are missing NBA Cup games, I would say. Philly, remember, they weren't able to make any noise in that last year because they had an early loss. But, now, Joel maybe could have even debuted Wednesday. It seemed like he was getting close. The league is saying that his suspension could start. Who are their next 2 games before next Tuesday?
They play at the Lakers on Friday, and then they host the Hornets on Sunday.
Yeah, that Hornets game without Joel is definitely losable, right? So
without
Joel
him and Maxey, absolutely.
That Joel suspension, probably cost them 1.5 to 2 wins, I would say. We don't know what kind of shape he's going to be in, but I think he'll still play at an all-star level. I don't know if he's going to be MVP, particularly coming back to begin with, but they just desperately need anything right now. So,
well, and then the unfortunate part of that for them with the timing that he comes back and they're playing games they might lose even with him, because they play the Knicks and the Cavs, and so they could very well win one or both of those. But they're so you when you miss somebody for winnable games, then you have them back for harder to win games. You got to lose on both ends relatively, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah, so that Maxey hamstring, it's going to be more Jared McCain. Reggie Jackson hasn't done much in very limited minutes. They're going to have to play Kyle Lowry more than they want to now. Also, they're just going to be so limited. And Paul George, welcome back from your knee hyperextension. Now you're the only offensive player available for this team. It's they're up. They've won 1 game, and they were lucky to win that one.
Yes, they were.
What are they in net? They're they've a negative double digits net.
Oh yeah, negative 10, negative 10.6. They're third. From
they
the
are
bottom.
Getting just blown out in these games.
Yeah, one of only 3 teams below negative double digits in net rating. The other 2 are strong company, the Jazz and the Wizards.
So a couple of returns that we can be excited about. Devin Vassell, according to Shams, could make his season debut Saturday against the Jazz.
How have the
And
Spurs played all of their games against like two teams?
um, and then Shaden Sharp, who we haven't seen in nearly a year now, with a left posterior labral tear. That's a good sign that he's now questionable for tonight against the Spurs. So it seems his return is imminent. But more so just that, like, if he's going to come back and play, I mean, maybe he could re-aggravate it, but that, this was something that is not going to require surgery. And so, like, I mean, that is a very, very anticipated return for me. I mean, the Blazers have no shooting at all. I really want to see who is going to, if you have him playing at a decent level, it's going to take a while, obviously, but they desperately need some shooting. And, I guess Kamara would probably go to the bench eventually, but, you want to see Sharp and Scoot together. So it's Blazers will be interesting to watch when Sharp ramps up. What else we got here?
Another significant return, Larry Markkinen, probable for Thursday against the Bucks. He's missed 3 straight. Jordan Clarkson likely back as well. He's missed 2 with plantar fasciitis on his left foot. And so the Jazz will at least look more competitive. I don't know. We'll see how they fare against the Bucks, but Markkinen is just so essential to what they want to do, even if what they want to do over the course of the season is lose games. In Milwaukee, they're talking about the Bucks because they're playing the Jazz on Thursday. Giannis is questionable. He was a limited participant in practice on Wednesday. He's dealing with this right adductor strain. And so, I mean, Marketed being back, Giannis likely being out. Could that potentially be a real like time to panic for the Bucks? And speaking of time to panic for the Bucks, Doc Rivers is making a change to the starting lineup.
Yeah, the Giannis thing first, just at home against the Jazz, you're just, the fact that, like, you have to sort of like push Giannis to play in this game. Like, again, this is talking about this whole idea of not having a floor for this team. It's like, no, like he has to play. Like they could very well lose against the Utah Jazz if he doesn't play, right? So, and then Andre Jackson is going to start over Gary Trent. And I mean, that Trent, I don't know what other offers he had, probably not much, but I mean, the fact that he's been so terrible, we thought he would be an upgrade over Malik Beasley. He's losing his starting spot already. He can't make a 3, and I think they're just going to try to go for more energy and effort in the starting lineup. Maybe there's a feeling that bringing Trent off the bench can free him up to shoot a little bit more. He's always sort of been this like, square peg in a round hole with respect to just being the 3-and-D guard that his teams have at times needed, and he's wanted to be more of a scorer. So perhaps this 6-man role will be better for him, or maybe he'll just continue to play terribly. And then Chris Middleton, slow ramp up. The Eric Name speaking to Bucks coach about Chris Middleton ramp up process is if he has to be out, at least we have Eric Name having these discussions.
How many different coaches has Eric done that with now?
Yeah, really. Now Doc does it better than Adrian Griffin did. Adrian Griffin was like hilariously defensive about it. But yeah, Chris Middleton playing 3-on-3, but he had an interview in the last week saying he just kind of wasn't ready to go, and there's some reporting that the organization expected him to be ready to go, but he says, I'm just not ready to go yet. So certainly could use him, but that's what's happening right now. And Doc was very adamant that they will be making the playoffs. What else we got here?
Wendell Carter, good news. He's dealing with plantar fasciitis in his left foot. He's considered day-to-day moving forward. I had been concerned because he got ruled out a day early for their contest on Wednesday, but that's good that he's at least getting closer to return, and they have Goga Batadze available. That said, they still are without Paolo Banchero. They still are not winning a ton of games.
Yeah, and this day-to-day thing, plantar fasciitis too, is a chronic type of thing. Like, I think we're going to see him miss more time, maybe reduced effectiveness, maybe it's a minutes limit. They really need him to space the floor from that position. Without Paolo, their defense has fallen off quite a bit without him as well, though Batadze's back to kind of stabilize that too. So I don't know that we've heard the last of this. Like, it's good that it's not something where it's like, oh, it needs a month off. But I think this is going to have to be managed throughout the season in all likelihood.
It looks like Jamal Murray is getting closer to being out of the concussion protocol. He is questionable for the Nuggets game Friday against Miami. So that's good that he's getting closer. And Vlatko Čančar has been he's been doubtful and then ruled out a series of times with the sprained right ankle. Now he's just ruled out. So it's probably going to be a little while for him. But more important that they're getting Jamal Murray back. Maybe not. I would say probably not Friday, but probably soon.
Yeah, I thought he could figure this year coming off the ACL, and particularly with their depth at power forward being tested. But, I haven't really seen him at all since he hurt himself. And, maybe he's just not going to, he's buddies with Jokic and they've always kept him around. And that was the joke initially. And then I thought he really had moments at times. And then he tore his ACL over the summer playing for Slovenia. Yeah, and so that was a real disappointment, but yeah, just not like they could use his theoretical skill set, but I think counting on him for anything right now might be too much. And for another huge matchup for Golden State in Cleveland on Friday, Draymond Green, Brandon Podziemski, D'Anthony Melton, all questionable. It's a knee contusion, illness for Podziemski, and Melton is working his way back from this lower back strain. He did play some 3-on-3, but they are taking that very cautiously. One of the selling points for him coming to Golden State was that Rick Celebrini has had a lot of experience managing back injuries.
The Cavs playing the Warriors on Friday. They have Jalen Tyson back from this sprained left hip, but it's going to be harder for Tyson to be in the rotation because Karis LeVert is also back. He had been dealing with right knee soreness. He is back. And then we don't know anything yet about the availability of Dean Wade. He was starting to begin the season, but he's missed 2 straight games due to an illness. So hopefully he returns. It'd be fun to see him against the Warriors, but we don't know just yet.
Yeah, and again, this is Cleveland has, with those 4 guys healthy, seems like they can manage pretty much any of these absences. Just kind of disappointing for Tyson. I always hate to see this when a young guy maybe has an opportunity to get into the rotation and then suffers an injury himself, which is what happened to Tyson with this hip issue. For Dallas, this weird right shoulder sprain that Derek Lively II suffered in warmups I think it was against Houston. That's going to have him out Friday against the Suns, who, as we noted, they already lost to. And PJ Washington also has a right knee sprain. Now, the Suns aren't necessarily a team that is going to kill you athletically, but Dallas's ability to fly around, protect the rim, and they really only have one viable center with Maxi Kleber doubtful coming back from this hamstring. So it looks like he's at least making some progress. But Najee Marshall, I think they really should be trying to play Quentin Grimes more, but they also, they have shooting guard is kind of the one area that they do have a fair amount of depth. But I think they just need to get generally more defense on the floor if you can't have it at the big positions. But Lively is just, Gafford just doesn't have the mobility on the perimeter, and they just need Lively to put out a lot of these fires that are being started by the rather flammable perimeter group that they have.
Jaylen Brown has largely been described as day-to-day with this strained left hip flexor, but he's now missing his 4th straight game on Friday, and he's ruled out a day early. So Boston's still been competitive, but we'll have to monitor that. And then Kornet.
Oh, yeah, we should have done, are they for real on the Nets, actually? Oh, well, we can talk about them another time.
Yeah, we definitely will. And then Kornet, the right hamstring tightness that caused him to leave the game against the Warriors, he's doubtful for Friday against Brooklyn. So I think they're going to give him some time. With the minutes they've been getting from Neemias Queta, I think they can withstand that. And of course, Xavier Tillman's largely been out of the rotation. They can have him log some of it. DeAndre Hunter has now missed 7 straight with this right knee issue, which has been reclassified at least once, maybe more than that. And so that's allowed Zachary Risochet to be in the starting lineup, but Hunter was intended to be a starting forward for them and has basically missed the whole year so far.
Yeah, and he's had so many problems with that right knee as well. And I think they called it soreness, and now it's right knee injury management. It's injury management is you miss a game that on the second night of a,
and that's a discretionary one. It's not you're out for 7 games. That's not management.
Yeah. Speaking of indefinite timelines, Mark Williams does not have any kind of a timeline for a return from this left foot tendon strain. He's limited to individual work at the moment. Hasn't seemed like he's been the fastest healer over the years. They've always been very nebulous about his possible return, but I desperately want to see what Charlotte could be with a real center, with an alley-oop threat for LaMelo, someone who can block some shots. I mean, Nick Richards has done everything that he can, but he's a backup, and I think we've somewhat tired of seeing him in that role over the last few years. Zach LaVine, unlikely to play in his revenge game if he still remembers that he needs to get revenge on the Timberwolves from that trade back in 2017. A right adductor strain is the issue there. He also was dealing with a shoulder issue last week. Again, we when guys are missing time with a muscle injury, it's usually going to be a couple of weeks. And then so I'd assume he's probably going to be in the starting lineup, although he's really struggling to shoot it from 3 this year after he had a nice breakout a season ago.
Speaking of talented shooting guards, maybe we haven't discussed this enough that Bradley Beal's been dealing with a strained right elbow. That could help explain why his role with the Suns has been so small, but also that happened a weirdly large amount last year, so maybe it's not. Well, I'm genuinely unsure.
Yeah, the Pels, we've enumerated their lengthy injury list before. Jordan Hawkins at least came back. He's been kind of managing this lower back issue. Alvarado sprained his ankle, which he seems to do every other week, but he didn't miss any time. And Zion had this weird issue against the Cavs where he played with what was called thigh soreness. I thought that was interesting terminology because it had been talked about as hamstring before, but of course, any mention of Zion's hamstring is loaded, so it was now called thigh soreness. And I'm like, when I think of thigh, I think of your quad front of the thigh. I'm like, oh no, I mean, actually, technically the hamstring is part of the thigh, so that they probably decided to call it thigh soreness. I don't understand why teams do this. Just fucking tell us the truth, guys. Jesus Christ.
And then one that actually was reported while we've been recording this. So John Morant left Wednesday's win over the Lakers a little bit early. They were up comfortably when he left, so it wasn't sure whether it was like something serious or anything else. That was described as a right hamstring injury. He is missing Friday, so ruled out a day early against the Wizards due to what's called right hip soreness. So he's out. That's the thing that's most important. But it shifting from hamstring to hip, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, Memphis is just another one of these like crazy injury reporting teams that you just have no idea what's going on. Speaking of which, Luke Kennard debuted in their easy win over the Lakers, and Anthony Davis was questionable. Sometimes you wonder, I mean, he did like warm up with the possibility of playing. Apparently there's this foot issue. It's being called a heel contusion, but it's something that dogged him throughout the summer and even towards the end of last year that was being managed. He did play the 76 games, of course. A year ago is a rather innocuous play, at least from what I could see, unless they showed the wrong thing or he just sort of stepped on a foot, but he didn't really land on it. He just kind of stepped on someone's foot, but it got him right in that heel area, and that seems to really be bothering him. But of course, things are utterly hopeless for the Lakers right now without him. They did get Christian Koloko back. I didn't get a chance to see how he played or how much, but the fact that they had to throw him into the rotation, and Christian Wood is still out. It's basically, if AD misses time, it's Jackson Hayes, and then it's like LeBron, Rui Hachimura, who didn't play due to an illness. And then, not only do they have to play, a LeBron at center or a Hachimura at center, but then they don't have any threes to play next to those guys either. And their guards are pretty small. So it's just, AD better not miss much time. He's been playing at a really, really high level. And when he's out, they're totally screwed. I mean, it's really hard to see, unless it's like a home game against a bad team, it's hard for me to favor them. And particularly with D'Angelo Russell playing how he's playing.
Sure. And briefly before that, Dalton Connect was the one who replaced Rui Hachimura in the starting lineup. He was 1 for 7, all threes, but only one make. And then D'Angelo Russell only played 22 minutes in that loss to the Memphis Grizzlies. And JJ Redick was pretty overtly critical of D'Angelo Russell's kind of his attention to detail is something that I remember from that.
Yeah, and Russell was questionable coming in. I think it was a hip issue, so that might have been part of it. But Reddick said, he was just very critical of the team overall. But like, buddy, like you got no talent on the team. Like you have no decent bigs, you have no decent backups at any position. Essentially, he tried to play Gabe Vincent, but unfortunately, Gabe Vincent is after he had that knee issue last year, is apparently never going to hit a shot again. He at least tries, but he's not like a premium stopper or anything. So he said it wasn't like disciplinary for Russell, but it's just he went with the guys who we thought gave us the best chance to win the game.
And Nate, by the way, if Anthony Davis misses Friday, so Friday the Lakers play the Sixers. It's an ESPN game that definitely has no Embiid and no Maxey, but it might have no Anthony Davis as well. Oh boy.
Yeah. Houston, Steven Adams had this right knee injury management. Of course, that's what cost him a year and a half. So he didn't play against the Spurs. I mean, I think there's also the possibility they just want to get a look at some of their other guys. I don't think this is anything to be concerned about, although it wasn't. Do they play again tonight? Is that? No, they don't. So no, it was not a back-to-back. So it's a little weird that he missed that, but hopefully it's nothing to be too concerned about.
And I mean, they still beat the Spurs without too much of an issue. And Jock Landale filled in as backup center.
Yeah, Toronto really looking like a snake bit season for them. We still have nothing, to my knowledge, on Kelly Olynyk and his back issues that have had him out the entire season. Then one of their backup center options, who actually has played reasonably well considering he's a second-round pick, Jonathan Mobo, suffered a right hip pointer in their lost blowout against Sacramento. Quickly is increasing his activity level in practices. Maybe he can come back from that pelvic contusion over the weekend. That doesn't sound particularly great. And then Jacoby Walter, another worrying injury, another guy who just again, is starting to play a little bit. Like they have plenty of playing time available for him, but he suffered this shoulder injury in camp, and then he suffered a right shoulder bruise in the game against the Kings. So that we'll see whether those are related, and he could miss some time. And Kyle Kuzma, he's probably actually making the Wizards, at least from my standpoint, more watchable by not playing, because I would rather just watch some of the other guys on the team. I'd rather see Bilal Coulibaly get a lot more rope offensively, or Sarr or Bub Carrington, rather than see Kuzma jack up a bunch of bad shots. But he's not going to play on Friday against the Grizzlies with this right groin strain that will have him missing his fourth straight. But so, again, I wouldn't anticipate he'll be back until, given that, it's usually a 2-week type of thing. And they're also will not be rushing him back given their priorities. That, it'd probably be a week still until we see him, would be my thought. If certainly possible, it's more than that. Let's see. We got any comments here to clean up before we go? Yeah, this is a good one from Hans. Let's close on this one. Which of the Rockets' young core has differentiated themselves from your expectations for better or worse so far this season?
I mean, I love Tari Eason, so I think for some people it might be him, but he's done well, and I'm not hugely surprised by that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so interested to see if you actually just give, because he's been kind of this curio coming off the bench, and you're just wreaking havoc, hitting some threes, getting out in transition. But there are some very unserious aspects to his game, and I'm very interested to see what it would look like if you just thrust, and we're not going to see it on this team anytime soon, but just thrust him into your every night starting small forward role. Would he be able to, be consistent enough in that role? But certainly he's flashed quite a bit. And Jalen Green, just with the number of threes that he's taken, he's getting to the foul line more as well, shooting 38% from three on this pretty crazy 10.1 per 36 volume. 41% from two. We'll just slide right by that.
You mean Jalen Green having a 54% true shooting despite drilling his threes at a ridiculous rate? Yeah, it's a little bit of a red flag.
I mean, it's kind of interesting that I wouldn't say that any one individual has just like blown away my expectations, but they've all just been like playable and solid so far. And you know, men, you would hope that he could do a little bit more on the ball than he has. And Şengün's shooting only 48% from two, although granted they've played the Spurs 3 times. Like they've actually played against some pretty good defenses as well. So I think he can start to break out a little bit. Yeah, but nobody, I mean, Fred VanVleet is shooting, 28% for 3. I know he's not part of the young core, but so they offensively, again, they played a lot of the same teams. I don't know how good San Antonio's defense is. Maybe we'll get an idea on that, but Shepherd barely playing kind of sucks.
I'm not gonna throw too much into Cam Whitmore being 1 for 18 on 3 so far. I mean, he was 36% last year on reasonable volume. So as long as he's more like what he did last year than this, he's fine.
Yeah, I want to see Jabari get some more minutes at backup center too. So yeah, like you noted, the fact that they're 5-3 and like really no one has had an offensive breakout. I mean, maybe Green is the closest. That's interesting. All right, then let's pack it in, and we will talk to y'all on Sunday night for the 15 and 60. Talk to y'all soon.